Welcome. For today's lesson, we're going to go over adding the felted loop onto the back of your artwork so that you can easily hang it on the wall. One of the things that I like to do when I'm prepping my wool fiber base is to attach the hanging loop right from the get-go. So what I'll do is build up my base, and then using scraps of felt that I have cut to small sizes after I trim up the various sizes of base felt that I use, I'll layer one or two onto the back of the felt and then cover the edges of each end of that strip with a little bit of loose fiber. And that really holds it nice and snug in place. And for some of my heavier pieces, this is just the base. Depending on the design of the piece, this could get built up with quite a bit more wool. So some of them are much heavier than others. Not that they're extremely heavy, but they do get pretty heavy. And so there are times when I'll put two pieces of felt together, and all I do to achieve that is I might snip this in half, use a shorter one, but I'm just taking two strips and felting them together. After I do that a little bit, I'm going to have a nice thick double layer. And I don't really feel like I need to attach them together too much, because the real strength of where it's attached and how it's being held in place comes in when I'm layering these loose fibers on the back of the base. And when I do this step in advance of my design, I am not risking pushing the white fibers of the core wool through the color of the illustration on the other side. But all I've done is laid those loose fibers over the edge of my strip. And then I do go in on top of the strip a little bit and just also make sure that that's really nice and securely attached to the base. So what I'm going to do now is take one of my finished pieces and attach the strip. Now these pieces, I did not put the strip on the back before I started. I've been working through this book quickly. And when I did the color on each of my bases, I did it quick. And I've really been trying to focus more on the speed of getting this book completed than some of the steps along the way, figuring I would go back after the fact and add the loop then. Good or bad, out of order, I don't always work in order. So tips of things to think about as benefits to working in order. So now you'll see what happens when I add a loop when the color is already in place and how I fix it after the fact. But I also know that these loops won't need to be quite as significant as these, because these are very small pieces. It's very light. Even just the base without the illustration is significantly different in weight compared to this one. So I'm not quite as worried about my hanging loop needing to support as much weight. When I place the loop on the piece, I always try to remember that when that loop is hanging, it might tug up a little bit, just like when you are securing a wire or some loop or mechanism, piece of hardware on the back of a framed piece of artwork. You don't want to have it too close to the top, because you don't want this to poke out and show once the piece is hung. So if my loop is up here and I'm hanging it, you're going to see the top of that loop from the front. So I have some pieces of artwork that I framed years ago that do that. And depending on what I have put on the wall to hang this on, I certainly don't want that to be popping out a little picture hanger or a hook or whatever it is and distract from the top plane of the piece of artwork. So make sure that the loop is a little further down. I just eyeball the center. You can certainly measure it, but I find that with felted pieces, I can, when I'm hanging it, kind of move it just a little bit so that if it isn't completely straight and I want to straighten it a bit more, the fibers of the felt will grab a hold of whatever hook or nail or whatever I'm hanging this on, and just a little bit of an adjustment will make it straighter. So I don't really worry so much about being dead center on the back of my pieces. So I'm going to put this right about in the middle and felt a little bit on each side. Being careful to watch my fingers and make sure that they don't get felted. I hate pricking my finger. Once I get it tacked into place, I don't really have to hold it anymore. And I am doing very shallow needling because a couple reasons. I'm about to put some strips of fiber over this to make it a bit stronger. But I also know that even with shallow needling, I'm poking through. So see how I have white fibers coming through my yellow? This one is a bit more forgiving because my yellow is a light color, but I do need to go back onto that front side and poke those white fibers back through so that I don't see them. And then I kind of rub it a little bit just to get those yellow fibers blended in with the white that came through. So you can see why I usually do this step before. I just got so busy and fast. I said, nope, I'm just going to keep going with my color. But just rub those in, and then you don't really see those white fibers anymore. You see it a little bit, but my goodness, not really very much at all. And then just to make it more secure, see that it's felted on, but over the long haul, the weight, even the light weight of this piece pulling against that little bit of felted surface area, I would fear that it would pull it right off. So I am still going to take a little bit of core wool and just lay it out over the edge. And with very shallow felting, when I'm over on this side, I can see that I'm felting through to my watermelon, which is a thicker layer of felt on the front. And that also will help to hide some of the fibers going through, but they are still going through. So just another thing to do is to felt a little bit sideways so that you're going a bit more diagonally into the colored fibers with less of a chance of poking through. And I'm just flattening out my felt and getting it secured in place. And poking through the white on this side, which as soon as you do it, it's gone. And I'm going to take another little piece and put it over on this side, tuck those in so I'm not extending beyond the edge of my piece. I'm going a little sideways here, but I'm also being very gentle with my needle because I'm felting straight up and down, but for this purpose, going in at an angle, I do want to be a bit more gentle with my needle just so that I don't increase my risk of breaking my needle. I also changed the angle of my needle so that my fibers are getting secured in a couple different directions. I have a little bit of white popping through. Go back and push that back down in. And just so that I don't look, or rather so that it doesn't look as though those two little spots are more felted than the fibers around it, I'll go back in and just kind of create a bit more density just to spread that look out, make it even. And there, you can tell just by adding that little bit of additional fiber, I have created a very simple, much more secure loop for hanging the piece on the wall. I also love that it's a great way to use up little pieces of felt that as things get cut to size based on whatever project I'm doing, I'm not wasting anything. And for the thicker pieces, this might be an example of one that I'll snip in half this way and then have a more narrow second layer, just so that I'm using all my scraps and not wasting anything. Okay, that is on there really well. I don't see any more white poking through, so we're going to call that one good. And I also wanted to do one that was a bit more three-dimensional, because really, you know, I should have done these before. So let's take this iris, and I am certainly going to squish this in the process of putting the back on. Again, another reason why I really should have done this before. Learn lessons through me, I hope, and remember to do that step, slow down. I'm notorious for needing to remind myself to just slow down and not do things out of sequence if they're going to make my life trickier in the long haul. But, you know, c'est la vie. So again, it's not very heavy. I'm not going to worry about doubling up my loop. I'm just going to use one because this has very little weight to it at all. I'm going to place it roughly in the middle. And as you can see, it is trickier because I'm kind of bending all over the place because of the 3D nature of the design. But what I need to do is just say to myself, okay, I'm gonna bend this and squish it while I'm in the process of putting my loop on, and then I will just regain the integrity of the design after I'm done. So I'm squishing it. I'm kind of poking through my irises here. I'm gonna pull that through, look, and then the green and the white pull right out of the purple. So I am going to keep flipping back and forth as I go, just so that this doesn't get too heavily felted to the base. You could also tuck a piece of wool in between these layers if you really wanted to. Kind of create a little bit of a barrier. I think I might actually do that just so that I don't have to disrupt those petals quite so much. So different tricks and things that you can do if you're working out of order. I might be a little bit further this way than that way. I don't think I eyeballed that quite so well. So I'm going to scooch that over before I make it more densely felted. Tack that in place. And then I'll grab a little bit of wool. and go at a little bit of an angle like I did with the watermelon. And it's a combination of felting it onto the base and still felting over this loop because these fibers are extending out. So just like the legs of a table that go horizontal, it creates more stability. I'm going sideways, trying not to poke my finger. So now is a great time to flip this over, take a peek at my iris. And that was a good idea, adding this. So I'm disrupting this petal in the back here, but protecting the petals in the front. So we're gonna leave that right there while we do the other side. I'm folding these down just so I don't have as much work to get them away from my top edge. Put them over my strip, over my loop. And get it felted right in place. As you can see, it's not the end of the world if you're doing this after the fact. It is just a little easier if you're doing it at this stage. Since I knew that, one of the reasons I just kept trucking when I was making my base colors. A good number of these bases I did in the car while we were on our way to a couple of different family adventures. So I just took a stack of wool like this and had a bag full of colors, and kids felt it in the back seat and I felt it in the front and got some color bases prepped. Just to make that easier. Simplified. I didn't worry about the loops. Okay. So do a little bit more over here. I'm not so worried about going at an angle because this iris is so thick that it's going to cover up any of the white that I'm poking through. I'm going to actually, elbow cracking. I'm going to put a little bit more right here along the loop just to even this look out, as well as add just a little bit more extra strength where that loop is attaching to the base. I'd rather have my loops be overly attached than less. Some of my very first illustrations, I hadn't figured out this technique yet. I did this portion of the technique and they weren't all the same sort of angle. Some of them were a bit more flat. I didn't use this, and I absolutely had to go back in and add this portion to create that additional strength because the loops were pulling right off. I just hadn't attached them well enough, and they were big pieces like this. So I do it even on little pieces like this at this point, just to be safe. I'm gonna pull that out of there. Gave me a little bit of extra barrier, and then I'm just going to tuck those white fibers back into the green in the background. A little bit more over there. Just like on the yellow, I'm gonna move my needle around a little bit just so that I don't have a more densely felted hole right there. And then I'm gonna go back in just a little and rebuild that integrity of where I want these petals to rest. Make sure they feel nice and snug. I think that's more yellow in the design than it is green coming through. And you can't really see it anyway, but I also want to add a bit more curve to this petal because I flattened it out. A bit more curve to that petal. Bit curve to this petal. These are the sorts of little curves that loosen over time. So the more densely felted those little sections become, the greater the strength of holding the shape over time. Otherwise, they'll just flatten and loosen. Those all feel good. I don't think I disrupted those at all. So there is the iris with the loop on the back. There is the watermelon with the loop on the back. Simple supplies, scraps of wool, felt that you make as you're cutting your various sizes for your wool base, and a little bit of core wool to lay across the loop and create a bit more stability and strength so that as you're hanging your piece, you have more surface area holding up that one little point along the wall. And there you have it. And try and learn from my mistake of trying to work too fast. And best practice is to attach your loop when you are prepping your base, whether you're prepping, actually not whether, very best practice would be doing this loop before you have attached any color onto the front, so that if your design or your ultimate illustration doesn't create layers beyond that base color in the area where your loop will be, you aren't poking white wool through your color. So best practice is to do it first and have it ready to go before you start layering in your color. And then you have a easy to hang piece for the wall. Thanks for joining me. I hope you'll check out more of my lessons. You are likely watching this if you're part of my community shortly after I recorded it, or sometime down the line. If you're new to my felting lessons, I encourage you to follow my social media channels. I'm active on Facebook and Instagram, and a little bit on TikTok, but definitely Instagram and Facebook. And I hope you will join my email list to be part of my community and get access to my lessons as soon as I create them. And check out the paid lessons that I have online on my website. I also offer a felting masterclass where I compile all the lessons into one section for members to have access to whenever they want to go in and reference past lessons or have a go-to place for anything new that's coming out. So thanks again. I appreciate you joining me for this lesson in attaching your wool loop for hanging your 2D artwork. And have a great day. And thanks again.